Exploitation done. Hello, everybody. David Shuster here. Across the U.S. political spectrum, on the left and the right, and among aviation experts, President Trump is being accused of exploiting the deaths of 67 people.
What he has said is not only unprofessional, unpresidential, inconsiderate of the status of this investigation, but frankly, it is just unhinged. That he could even say with any sort of certainty that diversity, equity, and inclusion policies had any part to play in this accident. Remember that 67 people are dead. I hate to get so upset here, but this is something that investigators will really need to pick apart piece by piece, and that is going to take some really significant time. We're not even 24 hours after this crash. We're barely even 12 hours after this crash. And he is saying with a lot of certainty that the blame is on DEI.
With first responders scrambling to find somebody, anybody in the water alive, Donald Trump went to the White House podium and blamed the crash on diversity efforts at the Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration.
I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
Trump has common sense? Well, Trump's sense of things got bludgeoned in the Political Playbook daily newsletter. A quick reality check. The initial FAA report says that air traffic control staffing responsibilities at Reagan were not normal and that one person was doing two jobs. New York Times Sydney Ember and Emily Steele report. ABC News notes there isn't any affirmative action in the hiring of air traffic controllers. The disability hiring policies that Trump criticized were actually maintained and used by his own first administration, Washington Post Glenn Kessel writes. The executive action Trump signed yesterday to unwind diversity programs at the Department of Transportation and the FAA came even though, as Bloomberg's Akela Gardner reports, there is no evidence that diversity initiatives led to the crash, nor is there evidence that such practices result in poor operational outcomes. In other words, Donald Trump was just making things up. And he made it personal in attacking former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run the Department of Transportation? He's a disaster. He was a disaster as a mayor. He ran his city into the ground, and he's a disaster now. He's just got a good line of bullshit.
Buttigieg responded to Trump on X with this: despicable. As families grieve, Trump should be leading, not lying. We put safety first, drove down close calls, grew air traffic control, and had zero commercial airline crash fatalities out of millions of flights on our watch. President Trump now oversees the military and the FAA. One of his first acts was to fire and suspend some of the key personnel who help keep our skies safe. Time for the president to show actual leadership and explain what he will do to prevent this from happening again. On Donald Trump's first day in office, just hours after his swearing in 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump froze the hiring of federal employees, including air traffic controllers. That same day, Trump pushed out the head of the Federal Aviation Administration. As the Daily Beast reported, FAA administrator quit on January 20th after Elon Musk told him to resign. Last fall, the administrator had apparently proposed fines on Musk's SpaceX for violating government regulations. 2 days into this administration, President Trump got rid of the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. Trump also fired heads of the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, and the head of the Coast Guard. And back to the FAA. One of the reasons the U.S. government in recent years sought to diversify recruiting was because the agency was not getting enough applicants for air traffic control positions. And by the way, once somebody applies and is accepted, they still have to go through rigorous training and pass a variety of tests before they can work as a controller. Also, industry experts say FAA staffing shortages have been exacerbated by Republican government shutdowns and the refusal by Republicans to fund agencies, including the FAA. For example, in 2019, one of the Republican lawmakers who voted to defund the FAA was Sean Duffy, who is now Donald Trump's transportation secretary. But those facts are inconvenient to Donald Trump and his sycophants. On Fox News, Jesse Waters described FAA hires this way:
vision impaired, missing limbs, completely paralyzed, epileptic, people who were severely intellectually disabled, psychiatrically disabled, and dwarfs. This was Biden's FAA just 2 years ago.
But as Jessica Tarlov, the lone liberal on Fox News, noted, this was also Trump's FAA during his last term. And back then, Donald Trump rightfully didn't have any problems with the diversity in recruiting.
And these DEI policies were put in place in 2013. He had every opportunity through his first administration to revoke them if they thought they were terrible, but he didn't.
On X, former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh put it all this way: a horrible midair collision, 67 people dead, and as bodies were just pulled from the water as family members are being notified, Trump casts blame. He blames Biden and Obama. He blames brown and black air traffic controllers. He blames brown and black people. Donald Trump is an utterly horrible human being. Donald Trump is the absolute worst of us. Shame on us, America, for putting him in power. Shame on us. Well, it actually gets even worse, because listen to Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth.
The environment around which we choose pilots or air traffic controllers, as the president pointed out correctly yesterday, better be the highest possible standard, the best of the best who are managing multiple flights, a flight a minute and managing radio traffic.
The best of the best as air traffic controllers and pilots. But as Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth sparked financial problems at the veterans organization he ran. He's admitted to having problems with alcohol. Hegseth's lawyer confirms that Hegseth paid a woman to stay quiet about his alleged sexual assault. And Hegseth has absolutely no experience running an organization as large as the Pentagon. Still, Pete Hegseth was a white weekend host on Fox News that Donald Trump wanted. So most Republicans marched along and confirmed him as Secretary of Defense. There is no evidence that diversity or DEI played any role in the crash that killed 67 people near Reagan National Airport. But there's plenty of evidence that Pete Hegseth benefited from white DEI, white affirmative action, and got a fast track to run the Department of Defense. And Hegseth was clearly not the best of the best, and yet he echoes Donald Trump's absurd claims about diversity. Donald Trump and his cabinet secretaries have become a horrific joke. They have no shame and no class, even as dead bodies are being pulled out from the icy Potomac. America is suffering through an aviation disaster and a moral disaster as well. Just when he thought Donald Trump could not stoop any lower. And he does.
Article, the Federal Aviation Administration. This was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite.
By the way, Donald Trump's immigration and customs agents have begun detaining Native Americans as the deportation rates go off the rails. Trump's extreme immigration raids now sweeping up Native Americans. Quote, at least 15 Native people in New Mexico and Arizona have reported that they've been stopped, questioned, or detained by federal law enforcement officials during immigration roundup efforts since Wednesday, according to Navajo Nation officials. They were asked to provide proof of citizenship despite being indigenous to the United States.
This has been an issue that's been ongoing for a long time. I mean, we go all the way back to World War II. A lot of our people were mistaken to be Japanese. So I think making sure that there is education and awareness, especially with, again, these custom enforcement agents that are patrolling in areas that have a mixture of not just Latino population, but also Native American population.
Check out that video at the link below. It generated a lot of comments on YouTube. One of the most popular is from Daniel, who wrote, "This goes to show how racist things really are." Indeed. I look forward to reading your comments about Donald Trump blaming the D.C. air crash on diversity. I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.